Hi everybody, Andrew here, back for another Barista Basics video. Now before I get into today's video, I need to make a quick disclaimer, of course, that any opinions stated in my videos are my own. I'm not here trying to represent Starbucks or any other corporation, or impede on any of these companies' intellectual properties or trademarks. These videos are simply meant just for fun and educational purposes. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into today's topic, which is the roasting of coffee beans. And this is the final episode in our little trilogy here of the journey of a coffee cherry. So we first spoke about the anatomy of a coffee cherry, how it's grown, we spoke briefly about how it's harvested, and that led us into discussing the processing of a coffee cherry, which renders us with green coffee beans. And our final step in this process is the roasting of these green coffee beans into the dark, more brittle coffee beans that we know, love, and consume. So with that said, let's go ahead and show you guys another little cheat sheet. Very surprising, I know. This is a cheat sheet for the 4 roasts of coffee, and these are arranged on a spectrum from the most acidic to the most bitter. So in that order, we have light roast, medium dark roast, and dark roast. And we're going to go ahead and talk about some specifics for each one of these, starting with our light roast coffee. And so as the name implies, this is the coffee bean that is roasted for the least amount of time. As a result, it has the lightest color, it has a light brown color to it, hence the name, and it has no oil on the surface. You see coffee beans with oil on them, you see coffee beans that are shiny, because they have been roasted long enough for the internal oils of the coffee bean to escape to the surface. For a light roast, we have not been roasted long enough to extract that oil. So that's why light roasted coffee beans don't have a glossy finish to them. Now, another interesting fact about light roast coffees is that this is the type of roast where you can more easily distinguish subtleties of flavors between the different types of light roast coffees. And that makes sense because if we consider the fact that we have roasted these coffee beans for the least amount of time out of the 4 that I listed previously, as opposed to having a more robust kind of roasty flavor to it, the uniqueness of the coffee gets to shine, and this typically is a result of the region where the coffee is grown. So say, for example, you tried a light roast and a dark roast coffee from, say, Latin America, you would typically, I'm speaking generally here, of course, but in general, you would more easily be able to distinguish the fact, it would be easier for you to distinguish that the light roast is from Latin America as opposed to the dark roast. So that is something that's fun and interesting about a light roast if you're looking for a coffee that has a higher acidity to it and is less bitter and has if you want a coffee that hangs on to its roots, I guess you could say, its flavor origins, then a light roast coffee is the kind for you. Moving on, we have our medium roast, and this is nicknamed America's roast because it is the most common, the most popular roast of coffee consumed in America. These are roasted for longer than our light roast, but they have not yet been roasted long enough to extract any oil, so they don't appear glossy on the outside, and they also, as a result of being roasted for longer, they have a bit of a darker brown color to them compared to the light roast. I wouldn't say they're dark per se, you close your eyes and you imagine something that's brown. That's the color that these coffee beans are. However, moving on to our medium dark roast, this is where the color starts to become richer, deeper, and darker. And medium dark is also where we start to see some oil appear on the surface of the coffee bean, since at this point they have been roasted for long enough where some of the oils have been able to be extracted from the insides of the coffee bean. Now, medium dark coffees typically have a bittersweet taste to them, which makes sense because if we think about our spectrum, we're moving down to more bitter. So something that has slightly bitter, slightly sweet aftertaste fits right at home for our medium dark. And that leaves us with our final roast, which is of course the dark roast. These are the beans that are roasted for the longest amount of time, and as a result, they have the most oil on their surface. They are the shiniest, they look the most glossy, because most of the oil has been able to be extracted. They also have the deepest and the darkest brown color to them due to their long roasting period. And dark roast it's more difficult to distinguish one dark roast from another, since the main quality of dark roast coffees are their bitterness and their roasty kind of flavor to them. So conversely to our light roasted coffee, where the sort of innate flavors of the coffee get to shine, those innate flavors are a little more subtle and more hidden and overpowered, is a good way to say that, by the fact that it's roasted for so long. So it's a little more difficult to distinguish different dark roasts from each other. Of course, that isn't to say that it's not possible, very doable, but it's just more difficult. But with that said, that is actually going to be all for today's video. I'll go ahead and show our nice little sheet here again of the 4 roasts, again arranged from most acidic to most bitter. And I think that's going to be it for the video. I hope that you guys enjoyed that video, of course. I hope that you guys learned something, even more importantly. And I hope that you guys have a great day. And I thank you so much for checking it out. Thank you.